How's it going, people? Salmon Slabber here, and this is the Morytania Campaign Part 2. Basically, the Morytania Campaign, if you've missed the first part, I'd highly recommend going to watch it, as that kind of explains one of the major conflicts that happened during this time. But, the Morytania Campaign itself, I'm using it broadly to cover a number of conflicts that happened between Mistlin and the Morytania region itself, as there were quite a few conflicts and campaigns made back and forth between the two. One of which is the fall of Hallowvale, which was when Drakan initially took over the Hallowland, now known today as the Sanguinesti region, or Darkmire. The next of was the Morytania campaign itself, which we will be covering in this video. After that was the Mistlin-Morytania Holy War, where the 7 priestly warriors, which we covered in part 1, fought back Drakan's hordes in the Silvaria Pass. So, with this one, we're going to be covering the actual Morytania campaign, the official Morytania campaign, if you will. In the first episode, we covered the 7 priestly warriors, and that was in the campaign just after this one, where Drakan's forces invaded Mistlin itself, and the Mistlin forces eventually managed to repel them and force them back into Morytania. This is the prior event to that. This is the prequel, if you will. The Morytania campaign then was an event in the late Third Age, and it happened in the Zamorak-controlled region of Morytania, which was currently lorded over by Drakan himself and his followers. It was during this time that 6 brothers, to this day, are now known as the Barrows brothers. They go by the names of Arim, Darak, Virak, Carol, Guthan and Torag, actually led a crusade consisting of several thousand Saradomist forces, which included many mercenaries and hired hands. The aim of this campaign was to undo the immense damage done by Lord Drakan, the self-proclaimed King of the Hallowland. In his previous campaign some years earlier, known as the Fall of Hallowvale, which was the very beginning of these Morytania campaigns. Until then, Morytania had been a Zerosian nation, and one of the 7 Zerosian fortresses. Carol stood where the village of Canifis now stands. Zamorak, in his attempt to wipe all remnants of Zaros from the face of Geilinor after he finally came back, had annihilated the fortress, along with the other 6 Zerosian fortresses scattered throughout the wilderness, or the Farinthi region as it was known back then. He then chose to give those lands, known as the Hallowlands at the time, to his main military ally in the rebellion against Zaros. This ally was the vampire Drakan. After the nation had fallen to Drakan's continuous raids, the Saradomists in Mistlin began to worry. After all, at the time, there was an ever-raging war within the Farinthi region to the north. They had quite enough on their plate as it was, dealing with those wars to their north, without having to deal with raids from the east as well. So, in a tactical maneuver, an army was formed. This army was formed of the strongest warriors Mistlin could possibly muster. This actually included the 6 young and promising brothers, who at the time had actually been blessed by some kind of mysterious stranger. What we now know was a follower of Zaros. With a force of several thousand men and the 6 brothers as the spearhead, this crusade left their humble homes and crossed the River Salve into Morytania. There have been many claims as to the great deeds of the Morytania campaign, and of course the accomplishments of the brothers themselves. Most notable sources of the crusade can be found in a number of ways, one of which is a crumbling tomb. This can be found in a small, unnamed settlement, and a variation of that story was also sent to Varak's library. The crumbling tomb itself you can find today, still, by talking to the unknown man at the Barrows, and the book within the Varak library goes by the name of The Fall of the Six. These 2 tomes together tell 2 stories linked to this Morytania campaign and give quite a large insight into what actually happened with the forces and the Barrows brothers themselves. But anyway, the forces of Saradomin eventually pushed their way all the way through Morytania with immense strength and valour, and each time they were attacked by Zamorak's forces, the brothers fought their way through. Seeing them valiantly fight these immense forces rallied the troops, and enabled them to down far more enemies than could ever have been expected of 6 young brothers, as well as the army itself. These battles that were fought during this time in Morytania were some of the most decisive Saradominist victories in the entirety of the God Wars of the Third Age, and Drakan's losses were very considerable. However, though the Barrows brothers led their men well, there was always a pall of fearing hanging over them. As the campaign pressed on through the swamps and neared its end, the mysterious person that had soon prior to this blessed the 6 brothers have actually been following them through their campaign of Morytania itself from its very beginning. And it was at this time, for whatever reason, he decided to finally relinquish his blessing. As the Saradomists reached the walls of Drakan's city of Darkmire, the stranger appeared to the Barrows brothers. "The time has come, my warriors. The gifts I bestow upon you have served you well, and you, in turn, have served your god. Now, it is time to begin your servitude to me, to my god. You shall stand ever vigilant for his return, and then you will be champions in his glorious army. We shall have victory against the usurper, but first, you must die." As though this was preordained or planned, perfectly in cue, the Zamorakian forces of Drakan attacked once more, this time, however, with a humongous army, a massive amount of creatures of unknown power threw themselves at the Saradominist army and the 6 brothers. This battle was a struggle. The Crusaders suffered immense casualties, and each man that died was a blow to the army. The 6 brothers' efforts were at the time not so grand. Carol's bolts were beginning to miss. Arim's spells would not weaken the enemy quite as much. Darak had actually lost his strength. Virak did not instill fear in their hearts any longer, and they suffered wounds, and eventually were forced to retreat back to their camp. That same night, thus closing this campaign with a despairing sigh, the 6 generals, the spearhead of the crusade, the Saradominist army, the Barrows brothers, died. The army, knowing that without their captains, the campaign would end in ruination and failure. The surviving soldiers fled back across the swamps and forests, and across the river that acted as some protection for them. They only paused to bury their great generals in 6 barrows at the site of their camp. Overall, their campaign was only partially a success. They destroyed the vast majority of Drakan's forces, thus weakening him, and hopefully preventing him from attacking them during this time, which indeed it actually did. Although conflicts with Morytania would reignite later on, in the year 1100 of the Fourth Age, when Drakan would finally launch an offensive against Mistalin through the Silvaria mountain pass. Although the Miscellanean and Asgarnian victory would leave the 2 nations at a relative stalemate until the very modern Sanguinesti Liberation War begins in the 5th Age. That conflict with Morytania that reignited in the year 1100 of the 4th Age was the war with the 7 priestly warriors from Part 1. All in all, this is the official Morytania campaign. At this time, Zamorak had just crushed the remaining forces of Zaros after finally coming back from banishment, and in turn Drakan asked, or was at least given, the area known as Hallowland at the time, which is Morytania to us. And it was at this time that Drakan actually managed to take over Hallowvale itself, which is the very first start of these Morytania campaigns, the fall of Hallowvale itself. And it was because of this one single act by Drakan taking over the eastern side, just to the east of Mistlin, that caused this entire Morytania campaign to begin. The wars in the Farinthi region were rampant, and it was complete chaos. All gods were fighting during this time, all in this region. And the Saradomists, being mainly found within Mistlin, had to now worry about the north as well as the east, where Drakan has just made his home. It was for that singular purpose that Saradomin and his forces were led to crusade through Morytania and hopefully wipe out this very worrying threat on their eastern borders. However, they did eventually fail, not due to a lack of troops, but simply because this hooded figure, this mysterious stranger, who had initially bestowed the Barrows brothers with immensely powerful armour and weapons, decided to relinquish them as soon as the army had finally reached the castle walls of Drakan himself. It was this singular act by this mysterious person that made this entire campaign crumble. So there are 2 more books that actually explain what happened during this time, but they are stories in and of themselves, both covering what happened to the Barrows brothers and their army, so I will keep them for another time. So hopefully you all enjoyed this. This was the Morytania campaign, and the next videos will probably cover those 2 books, which will also cover the Barrows in a bit more detail, because I'm sure many of you are interested in what happens to the Barrows brothers. You also gain quite an insight into who this mysterious stranger actually is. So, until next time people, I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you again. Have a good one.